Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here so early in the morning. So today we will have 3 speakers. Unfortunately, one of them couldn't make it. And so the idea for the session is that we will have 3 talks in a row from my esteemed speakers here. And we will take a couple of questions at the end of each talk. And then if there is enough time at the end of the session, I propose that we have a panel discussion and you can then ask more questions at the end. I remind you that you can use this Slido app and you can use your laptop or any mobile device. If you go to the Slido webpage, you can enter the code for the event, which is 3525. And you have to go to the Audimax room and you can type in your questions there. And so you can also, if you have questions that you would like to be answered, you can also ask questions in that way. And I will be monitoring this channel on the internet. So the idea for this session, so I think we are all, or at some point we have all been academics in this room. And so I think we are all aware that there are a number of issues in academia. Probably because the way we do academia hasn't changed much over the last 40 years. So the way funding is distributed, the way publications are written and published or evaluated and published, the way careers are assessed and the way people are promoted, this is based on a system that was designed probably in the 60s or 70s and that hasn't changed much since, even though there is vastly more people who are working in research and academia nowadays. And so I think that we are all aware that this leads to a certain number of issues and problems. And some of these issues and problems have been discussed in other sessions. But the idea for that session was to try to put together a panel of speakers who can present some ideas about maybe how the system can be changed, whatever aspect of the system it is. And maybe how can academia can be disrupted in the same way that some other industries have been disrupted in the last couple of years through new ideas or new technologies. And so we will have 3 speakers. The first one will be Pablo Garcia Tello. He's a colleague of mine from CERN. So Pablo is a physicist by training. And he also worked in, he's done his PhD in material science. And he was then a postdoc at MIT. He's worked for a number of companies, including Philips, in the area of micro, nanoelectronics, and biotechnology. He's been a contract and program manager at the Aerospace and Defense Industry Association of Europe. And he's worked also as a consultant in EU innovation programs and for a number of private and public sector organizations in chemical and ICT areas. So he has a very broad spectrum, a very broad expertise. And he's now working at CERN, where he's the section head of the development of EU projects and initiatives at CERN in Geneva. And he's going to tell us about a new initiative that was spearheaded by CERN and by some other large-scale research organizations that is called Achard. So, Pablo?
Should I go there?
As you prefer.
Yeah, because I don't see my slides.
We don't see it. You have this microphone if you prefer.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks, Renaud, for inviting me to this fantastic forum. And I would like to talk to you about an initiative that we have initiated from the side of the research infrastructures in Europe that we think can change the way that fundamental science creates disruption, and also the way that research is funded. So you see, the name of the initiative is Attract, and you can go to the website is an initiative that has started with 20 million euros funded by the European Commission in the Research Infrastructures Program. And what you see there is the partners of the consortium. So we have CERN, which is the coordinator. We have a series of big labs as well, EMBL, the European Molecular Biology Lab, European Southern Observatory, ESRF, Synchrotron in Grenoble, XFEL, and ILL. And from the point of view of industry, we have ERMA, which is the European Industrial Research Management Association, which is the federated entry point in Brussels of many of the industry and companies in Europe. And from the side of business, we have ESADE Business School in Barcelona, and we have from the side of the entrepreneurship, especially for young entrepreneurs, Aalto University in Finland. So, to give you a little bit of the political context in which this initiative has been thought about. So in Europe, we have many research infrastructures. They are of European level, like CERN, ESRF, ESO, but there are also many of them at national level. But since we are not yet the United States of Europe, in many places this knowledge is reinvented, and it turns out that all the investment that is made by the member states and the Commission is not used in an optimal level. So we thought about creating a new innovation ecosystem in which fundamental research not only generates value in terms of knowledge, but generates value in terms of innovation. If you see how much does it take from an idea of coming from fundamental research to go from an idea and a prototype towards the market, it takes many years, and in the majority of the cases, this is done in a serendipitous way, not really in a systematic way. But here, we are trying to put from the beginning fundamental scientists and technologists and engineers together with industrial ones. So there is a development, especially for instrumentation in detection and imaging technologies, that will help to increase and to push the limits of fundamental science frontiers, but at the same time, there is an eye towards the applications outside the pure scientific area. So the philosophy of the Achard initiative is, first of all, that fundamental science, in whatever field, not only in particle physics, generates value, and this value is in terms of knowledge, but it's also in terms of breakthrough instrumentation that is invented in order to push these frontiers. And if you do it together with industry, then you have also a vision for applications into areas that are not only scientific. And why we talk about breakthrough technologies. So I always put the example of CERN because it's the one I know since I worked there. With the discovery of the Higgs boson, we are able to see to 10 to the minus 12 centimeters. But the mission of CERN is to figure out what is the origin of the universe, which is, according to our theories, to 10 to the minus 45. So this huge gap between -12 and -45 is the technological gap that we have to jump over. It's many orders of magnitude. So if you go to the CERN cafeteria and you talk about that your technology is capable of increasing in performance 20%, 30%, 40%, 70%, 90% better than what is existing today, nobody will pay you attention. But if you say that your technology is 1 or 2 orders of magnitude better than what is existing today, then the people will start to listen. Because we are interested in orders of magnitude jump, not in incrementalism. And when you talk about orders of magnitude jump, then you have a big value of that to make it commercial. In order to shorten this value of that, you need to sort of incubate this technology, and especially public funding is essential for that, because no private funding will go in technology readiness level from 1 to 6. They will come with 6 and beyond. So this is the goal of Attract. The goal of Attract is to create an ecosystem of innovation in breakthrough, and this is important, breakthrough detection and imaging technologies, and I mean from sensors to computing, that helps first to absorb the risk of technologies and then mitigate this risk so private capital could enter in the end and could capture and extract all this value that is generated through fundamental research in the shape of instrumentation. And why do we need that? Because many of you have heard about the societal challenges, etc., etc. Global warming is too late. And everybody agrees that we will need breakthroughs in order to really tackle these problems. Because with incremental technologies, you will be only reacting in a reacting mode towards what is happening. But with breakthrough technologies, you will be in the anticipation mode. Therefore, we are not talking here about incrementalism. We are talking here about technologies that will allow us to anticipate the changes that will be produced in the next decades. And in order to form this ecosystem, we started with these actors that you see there. So we call the value generators, the research infrastructures and their communities. I'm not talking here only of the names that you see there. We are just a vehicle, and I will explain why we are the vehicle. But we are talking about the communities that collaborate with research infrastructures, which is universities, small and medium-sized enterprises, large corporations. And we have the value extractors in terms of industry and in terms of business and young entrepreneurship. And of course, you need a source of money that is able to be so patient and not expecting a return of investment that is immediate, but is willing to wait a little bit. If you open this phone or an iPhone, what will you find inside? What will you find inside is a touch screen that was invented at CERN in the 70s. You will find the DRAM that was invented by DARPA in the 70s, 60s, 80s, 70s. You will find batteries, lithium batteries, whatever. These are the breakthrough innovation. The integration of this in the iPhone is not a breakthrough innovation. What is a breakthrough innovation is what is inside. And if you trace back the history of who has been funding these technologies is not the private sector, it's the public sector. So that is why it's important to have funding that has long patience. But at the same time, you need to keep an eye on the return of investment for society. So rather than being 20 years, you kind of reduce it to less than 10. And, excuse me, this type of reasoning is what is known, probably many of you know it, as the Pasteur Quadrant. So is the view that it's possible to do fundamental research with an eye on innovation. So everyone gets whatever is good for this one. It's not about converting the fundamental scientists or engineers in entrepreneurs. That's normally a very bad idea. It's about allowing everyone to do what they are best at. Because the people that generate value don't necessarily need to be the same people that extract value. Normally, fundamental scientists and engineers are very bad managers of companies. So don't put them running them. And this philosophy is what we call co-innovation, collaboration and competition. So co-innovation puts fundamental scientists and engineers coming from research infrastructures, universities, in the same footing with scientists and engineers coming from industry. When I worked in Philips for 10 years, and then I moved afterwards I moved to CERN, I see the same passion in a technology guy that is at CERN or that is in Philips. They both would like to create the best detectors in the world. The only thing and difference is that one of them is going to apply it to the Atlas or CMS experiment or the LHC, and the other one is going to apply it to an intelligent car. But the passion for creating and the dedication for creating the best detector in the world is the same in both. So you need to put both of them together from day one and not create technologies that then afterwards are in the search for a solution. So you create these wonderful technologies and then they're waiting there for a problem to be solved. And in many cases they just remain on the shelves and on the drawers rather than keeping an eye on the applications from the beginning. So we try to break this traditional relationship of buyers and suppliers between research centers and industry. And this is what we call co-innovation. And why do we focus on detection and imaging technologies understood in the broader spectrum? From the moment and the way that you generate data or you acquire data to all the way towards what do you do with these data and how do you get information and finally how do you get knowledge. So we are talking of sensors, data acquisition system, data management systems, computation, etc. So why do we focus on this? Well, first because it's those are the fundamental building blocks in any kind of instrumentation that you need to push the limits of science. Think about telescopes, think about synchrotron sources, think about big lasers. But at the same time, those are the building blocks that will enable our society in the future. Think about healthcare, medical imaging, for example, diagnosis. Think about intelligent cars. How much detection and imaging technologies and computation do you need for intelligent cars? Think about smart cities. Think about transport in general. So detection and imaging technologies are the backbone of the society that we will see in the future. It's very difficult, actually, to imagine any technology in the future that will not be on the need of detection and imaging in one way or another. Pick up any example that you want here, and if you follow the value chain of this technology, you will figure out that at certain points, or many of one certain point, you will need, in one way or another, detection and imaging technologies. So as I mentioned, we have, in this starting phase, the value creators, research infrastructures and their communities, and the value extractors, which is industry, business, and young entrepreneurship. And we have different pilot studies that we have been realizing this year with master level students coming from different disciplines, especially from business, engineering, and design. You can Google, for example, CBI at CERN, or Challenge-Based Innovation at CERN, and you will get a feeling of the prototype that we have been running along these years on putting in contact interdisciplinary teams of master-level students with breakthrough technologies and give them a challenge that normally is coming from the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and tell them to create a prototype that will solve one of these particular challenges. For example, how to make the life of elderly people more autonomous at home, or how to deal with water scarcity in developing countries. So you just Google this, and then you will have an idea of how many projects we have been running as experiments that we will as well incorporate in the Attract initiative. So now let me say a little words of why we think the Attract could change the landscape of funding, because as I mentioned before, everyone, when you see many articles about the value of debt, what do you see? You see a single picture. This value of debt, it can be drawn in many different ways, but the value of debt is not the same for every single kind of technology. No one size fits all. With breakthrough technologies that they have the capacity to make profound changes in society, the value of debt is really deep. For incremental technologies, is really shallow. That means that private capital alone could cross the value of debt for incremental technologies. But with breakthrough technologies, you need two phases to cross it. You need a phase in which you absorb the risk of these technologies, and then you need a phase in which you mitigate this risk, which in other words means that if you are starting with technology readiness level, which is in fashion today to speak in these terms, if you start with technology readiness level from 1 to 3, you need a good injection of public capital to close the gap and achieve technology readiness level 6, 7. And only then the private funding will be interested in putting the additional money. And I mean VCs, business angels. Normally these guys are called risk capital, but they are the less risky people you could come across. So you need public funding to go and absorb this risk And then these guys will mitigate the risk for going to the market. And this is something that in Europe, it doesn't exist as a single instrument. The only example that you have is the SME instrument phase 1 and phase 2. But what is the problem? The problem is that if you are lucky enough to get a grant in the SME instrument phase 1 with around 2% success rate, and you want to continue, you have to apply again and get in the same lottery. And then I calculated, since, is there anybody from the Commission here? Okay. I calculated the probability using European funding for one idea to go to the market from TRL 1 to TRL 7, 8 is approximately 1 in 10,000, taking conservative numbers of the success rates of the different instruments. But what we want to do in Achard is to have a continuous instrument in which we're starting with the phase 1, and we have an initial 20 million euros easy funding, in which we dedicate 17 of them to fund 170 breakthrough ideas. We have launched an open call the past August that closed in October, end of October, and now we are in the process of evaluating the 1,200 proposals that we have received. Then we will continue, hopefully, with a new call that is in the research infrastructure program, in which we will enter into what we call a track phase 2. And a track phase 2 will start with a selection of 6 to 7 projects among the 170 that will go directly to phase 2. They will not need to apply again. What they will need to do is to enhance the consortium and allow all the partners to come in so they can demonstrate that they can achieve technology readiness level 7 to 8. So you don't enter in the lottery again. If you are selected, you will receive funding in the second stage, under the condition that you are able to demonstrate that your new consortium is more than just a research consortium, that industry is not playing a decorative role there. And then we are in talks with the European Commission to actually study the possibility if this instrument could be scaled up to a significant value in the next European funding program, Horizon Europe, to repeat the seed and scale funding mechanism. So if you take a snapshot of a tract in 2023, you will find many projects that are on phase 1, all the projects that are in phase 2. And many of them, well, all of them actually, are dealing with detection and imaging technologies, and our mission as facilitators is to cross-connect them. And we will do it in 2 ways. First of all, implementing a system, could be based on blockchain or something similar, in which results coming from a project could be put into the open, but the inventors are acknowledged through a kind of blockchain system. But at the same time, anyone can share information with any other and then increase the multiplication factor by people talking to each other. So if I'm developing a fantastic sensor for acquiring data in real time whatever kind of data. Let's suppose there is temperature. Let's suppose there is whatever. And somebody else is developing a data acquisition system that can actually process this data in real time. It's natural that these two guys, they talk together. And on top of that, our idea is to superimpose a cloud. You can have this picture, a cloud of interdisciplinary teams of students that are inspired by these technologies developed in these projects, and they think about the social application of these technologies for social innovation. So this is our dream. This is the snapshot picture on how we see Achard in 2023, 24. And then we will have an ecosystem in Europe in which breakthrough detection and imaging technologies are absorbed, the risk is absorbed, and then they will be ready to use other instruments that exist in Europe. If you go to the European Investment Bank, if you go to the European Investment Fund, you find fantastic instruments there, especially for SME, the Innofin instruments, etc. But they have never, ever been connected with the world of grants. They live separately, and it's sad, because we have the instruments in Europe to go from idea to the market. The only thing that is missing is connecting the dots, is to have a conveyor belt that actually can accompany a project from the very beginning towards the very end in a stage situation, but not the way it exists today, that is interrupting the innovation cycle, because every time you finish a project and you want to go further, you have to apply again, and then you apply again in the roulette with a very low success rate. So I will finish so this is our dream. Don't get the impression that this is a CERN-centric project. It is not. We are just the coordinators. Actually, it will not work if it's a CERN-centric project. The only thing is that somebody has to start it. And well, our dream is to change the way in which fundamental research, being this in particle physics, in biology, in astrophysics, in material science, change the way in which fundamental research generates value to society, working together with industry from day zero, and allowing a space in which value creators and value captors do what is best at what they're doing, and not trying to mix up things, because normally it's a very bad idea, and at the same time, the possibility to create an instrument in which the innovation cycle, a public money instrument, in which the innovation cycle from idea to the market is not interrupted, but is streamlined, and you can have a continuous pipeline of projects. So that's in a nutshell the Achard initiative. So thanks a lot.
So thank you very much, Pablo. I think we have time for a couple of questions. There's one here.
Yeah.
Oh, oui.
It's on.
Hi. Thank you for your talk. I think it was very interesting, and I think that this idea has a lot of potential in the technological developments. But how would you apply this to the biomedical field, where we require animal experimentation, clinical trials, very long times, and lots and lots of money. So how do you see this?
You can use one of these microphones, maybe, Pablo. I think it's easier. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, I mean, the medical field is any other field in detection and imaging. Out of the 1,200 proposals that we have received in the open call, there are many of medical imaging and many that they need animal experimentation. The only thing is that you need to comply with the ethics that is required for that. I'm not saying that all the projects will require the same time to the market. The only thing I'm saying here is that we need to take into account projects that are in the low-hanging fruit area, and in phase 2 they could receive less than 2 million euros because they don't need it, and projects that require more funding and more time, and they will receive more.
Thank you very much for this nice presentation and just to inspire us. I wonder, I'm very happy to see stocks in this auditorium to show this, the power of this. And I wanted to know if you consider that it is like a translational research. It's a way to think, to translate fundamental science into society, but with the idea of translational research. What is your opinion?
Can you repeat the question? I mean, I know that translational is in fashion today. But
yeah, translational research normally it's used in medicinal.
Yeah.
The doctors are saying, okay, we are going to do research, but they are doing medical research, which is totally different as fundamental research. So in my opinion, this application of stocks could be for life science or chemists, more not related to technology, thinking more about the translational research. So thinking in the future, let's say, doing your basic research, but thinking in this translation of the knowledge. But I like a lot how you show that with the technology. So that is very, very interesting. But do you think that could be translational research for without technology? Because the problem here is what happened with the people who are not doing technology.
That's a very good question. So could be, if I translate a little bit the question, let me just so your question more or less will be, could be anything that is in between the Bohr quadrant and the Pasteur quadrant. This is what you're asking.
Yeah, it's not like because Pasteur quadrant is also thinking of something which is like Pasteur did, no?
Yeah.
Nobody knows why people die when they drink water.
Correct.
And then he said, okay, why? And then he searched. But
Correct.
that was biology.
Yes.
And he invented a new area of research.
Yes.
And then, okay, then life, we are here because of people, let's say, no? That is why it's more, okay, thinking in the use is part. So the question, I say, okay, we can work on that.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. Yes. As long as you have an eye into the potential application of this is an initiative for that. I mean, the way you make your discovery can be manifolded. Can be by chance, can be by serendipity, can be whatever. But the moment that you make it, then you have to keep two eyes. The eyes that goes into pushing the limit of science, and the eye that goes into, okay, how I could apply this? And you don't necessarily need to be the same person. Because the fundamental assumption that, in my view, is wrong is that the people that are generating value are not the same as the people that are capturing this value. And normally, you see many initiatives that try to transform researchers into entrepreneurs or into industrialists. If they are researchers, it's because they have the good reasons to be. So let them do what they do best, and when there is the time to capture the value that they generate, put people that are able to capture this value.
Okay, one last question.
Thanks for the insightful talk. That was really interesting. Quick question. Just that, what phase of the project should the idea be in? Like as abstract as that, can such an application, giving a concrete application, would that make a good project proposal, or what phase of the project should it be to apply for the grant? You know? Do you understand my question?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, I cannot go into the details of how we organize the call. Well, just to make it clear, the call is closed now. And are we going to repeat the call? Well, depends on our discussion with the Commission, especially for Horizon Europe. Now we're making a pilot within Horizon 2020 of Phase 1 and Phase 2. So, what we asked anyone that was interested in submitting a proposal, the proposal, by the way, was 4 pages. And you could collaborate even if you were 2 partners in the same country in Europe. You cannot imagine how much legal discussions we had for that. But what we asked to any researcher that was submitting a proposal is that you need to think about an application, even if it's in a long term. Because this is not an initiative to fund fundamental research per se. You have to let your imagination fly and see, wow, if I have a detector of muons or cosmic rays or whatever it is, or if I have a quantum detector, how this could be used for industrial and societal applications, even if it's in a long term. And please, if you apply, partner with a small and medium-sized enterprise, with a startup, etc. So these 2 eyes are in the same way. That doesn't mean that you are going to serve the purposes of the SME, or the SME is going to serve your purposes. You have to find a win-win situation.
My question was what stage the project should be at now, like when they apply for that.
Sorry?
My question was more about what stage of the, should that just be an idea, or what should
It could be an idea. It could have been an idea, yes. We were targeting, in this call, we were targeting for TRL level 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pablo. I think we have to move on. So let's thank the speaker again. So our next speaker is Pablo Achard, who is currently working at the University of Geneva for the rectorate. And Pablo and I, we have a mirrored careers, because he started his career at CERN as a physicist, and he then went on to become a computational neuroscientist. That's when we met. And then after that, eventually transited to science policy, while I started as a computational neuroscientist, and I'm now working at CERN. So, and Pablo is going to tell us about citizen science and open science.
Thank you. So first, a disclaimer: the title of the session is "Future of Research." And if you expect answers, I have no answers about the future of research. I hope there might be some inspiring innovations here, but that's all what I can promise. So this is Michel Mayor. Michel Mayor is an astronomer. He's famous for having discovered the first exoplanet, one of his planets orbiting around other suns, other stars. He received multiple prizes, as you can imagine. He even has a meteorite called after him, which I find is super cool. But another feature which is quite cool is that he has an avatar. He has a video game character named after him. That's in the video game called EVE Online. It's what we call MMO, massively multiplayer online game. The game exists for 15 years, huh? And it's a very open world, And now, since a year and a half, Michel Mayer is inside the game. So how comes? Let me show you a small video.
Project Discovery is a citizen science project within EVE Online, which contributes to real-world scientific research through gameplay. Players are provided with astronomical data with the aim of discovering real-life exoplanets and earning in-game rewards. EVE Online is a free-to-play space MMO, and to take part, you only need to create an account and download the game. After logging in and creating a character, all players have access to Project Discovery. Project Discovery is located here on your Neocom menu. The project director, Professor Michel Mayer, will take you through a short training program to get you started. Once you have completed the training tasks, you can start analyzing real data. What you see here is a measure of a star's brightness, called a luminosity graph. The graph shows the average luminosity over a period of about 28 days. Any orbiting planet transiting between the star and the telescope may cause a slight dip in luminosity, and those dips are the signs we are looking for. Your task is to find these dips and mark them. A transit will cause a dip in luminosity, as you can see here.
So I stop the video here. If you want to learn exactly how to play, you can easily find it on YouTube. So first thing here is that the video game industry has really cool means to make funny videos that we cannot afford otherwise. As you see, we don't cheat with the gamers. We will tell them these are real data. These are you will help researchers, right? So the gamers, they're not forced to do this. This is really option into the game. You can go there and spend your time marking transits. So this depth in the luminosity curve. So it's not the first time that we did not invent what we call citizen science. The idea of having everyone helping researchers doing tasks. There exist several citizen science initiatives. A very famous platform is called Zooniverse. I love this one, Snapshot Serengeti, where you have pictures taken from the Serengeti Natural Park. And people are asked to find which animal it is taken, what are they doing, eating, standing, resting, moving, and so on, how many are they, and so on and so forth. I love this one because when she was 12, my daughter spent hours cataloging images, hoping to find a lion or a giraffe, and having many gazelles. But the good... So, first of all, you could wonder how good people are at doing these tasks. We have to say that the same image is given to 10, 15, 20 people until you reach a consensus, right? And it's been shown that the quality of annotations by amateurs, because of this redundancy, is as good or even slightly better than experts, because experts, after 100, 200, 300 images, get tired and start making mistakes, right? So the quality of annotation by amateurs is very good. Second is that we monitor this quality throughout the process, because we give some what we call gold data that have already been annotated by experts, and randomly we put these images into the process. So we can check every 10, 20 images that people are still doing good. And if not, then we can weight their contribution to zero and train them until they reach again a good accuracy score. Citizen science is pretty interesting for various things. First, for bringing citizens into science, having them understand how science works. It's also very useful if you have a lot of data to analyze. but it's somehow limited to simple tasks, like this one, like annotating images, finding dips into the luminosity curve. And another issue is that it's pretty difficult to attract enough people, right? So there are a couple of famous platforms. It's easy to do. I mean, they have plenty of people. You can create your own citizen science platform. There are free websites to do so. It takes you a couple of hours, but you will have hard time attracting hundreds or thousands of people onto your platform. You have to advertise it quite a lot. So the idea of putting it into a video game is to find a community of people who are already there and who might be interested into participating into this endeavor. And well, gamers share a couple of characteristics with researchers. You know, they love to solve problems. They can stand up late in the night. They love cooperation and competition, and so on and so forth. And here are the numbers. We launched it in July last year. So in 1.5 years, we had more than 150,000 participants to the project discovery task, and we got more than 200 million annotations, which is insane. To be honest, I counted at least, it's a very conservative estimate, at least 5 seconds per task. It's more than 30 years of work. So it works with research, with gamers, sorry. We wanted to do this in another framework, which is the one of e-learning. So we have a MOOC on the diversity of exoplanets, and we also ask the learners, the MOOCers, sorry, this is going too fast. We ask the learners to participate also in the same kind of task. And we even ask them to go beyond this and start fitting the curves and measuring different parameters on the transit, so we can find the size of the planet, for instance, and go much deeper into the understanding of science. That's more my background. I was in charge of developing MOOCs for the University of Geneva 5-6 years ago, and I was a bit frustrated by, having nice courses and only quizzes to evaluate the understanding of participants into the course, and with that you can really do hands-on learning. You can have people doing research by themselves. There are good reasons to do so. This is a quote from a position paper from the League of European Research Universities. So if you want to know more about Leroux, Catherine Mess is right there in the second row, on excellent education in research-rich universities, saying that, well, in research-rich universities, students do not just learn about research, they also undertake research and inquiry within and across disciplines. The active engagement with cutting-edge inquiry leads to a wide range of learning outcomes. And this is not a new idea. I mean, it's the idea. It's the Humboldt idea of university. So Humboldt is Wilhelm von Humboldt, the brother of Alexander, the geographer, who was education minister in Prussia in 1815 and invented the Humboldtian model, where teaching and research are done under the same roof. And the model has proved to be very effective, since by the end of the 19th century, the German science was top in the world and then copied in the US and everywhere. So this idea of mixing teaching and research and cross-fertilizing them is not new, but what we do is we do it at the level, in the online world. and again. Here we go. This is another MOOC that we enrich with a MOOC for massive open online research exercise. It's a MOOC on the history of world literature, and I'm pretty... So the question the professor asked is, what is the concept of world literature, how it evolved with time, why everyone in the world should read some authors like Shakespeare, Goethe, or you name it. So he has a MOOC, and we ask the participants to help him to do two things. The first one is to transcribe some text, because these are old texts that were scanned and are very hard to read by automated detection. And the second one is to classify this, a lot of text about world literature. I like this project because of two things. First one, it shows you that you don't need to be a physicist to do citizen science. You can have it in humanities. Actually, having a lot of documents, a lot of text is a database. And the second one is that this is a quite complex task. I would not be able to do it without watching the course before, because to do this classification task, you have to understand what are the different concepts behind it, and to really be helpful for the professor, for the researcher. So, first community is a community of gamers. The second community involved into citizen science is the community of e-learners. There's a third one we want to tackle is the one of patients, and particularly of lifelong disease like type 1 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes, you probably know, is a disease where the pancreas doesn't produce insulin anymore, and patients have to control for all their life the level of glycemia into the blood, so as to inject insulin to compensate the effect of glycemia. They have to or to eat some sugar to compensate an effect of too low glycemia. They have to anticipate all the time how much food they will take, how much exercise they will do, and so on and so forth. So it's a disease that takes your brain every day for the rest of your life. Currently, at the Hospital of Geneva, there is a training for patients. There are sessions of about 10, 12 patients at a time, twice a year, to teach them how to live with diabetes. Not only what is diabetes, this most of them know, but how to live with diabetes. And we want to, sorry, again. We are doing a MOOC to go through this. So with Dr. Gastaldi, we will help them understand and learn how to live with diabetes. They will be able to train them with exercises they can do on themselves, like taking 1 unit of insulin and see the effect of 1 unit of insulin, taking a small amount of carbs and seeing the effect of small amount of carbs, and so on and so forth. So measuring their own constants, because the glycemia level is an equation with 26 parameters. So we want them to learn how to separate these different parameters. We've been testing this idea with patients, and they are very active. Another advantage of this is that we go from 12 to much more patients, but also their families, because you can be parent of a diabetic child, you can be the husband or wife of a diabetic person, and doing the cooking, you can have a diabetic child in your class and want to learn how to react and so on and so forth. You can be a nurse having a diabetic patient. Once again, we ask them to participate in research. So it can be analyzing, the tool is ready for many different tasks. It can be analyzing images, it can be many things. The first thing we're going to do with them is to ask them to classify videos that you found on YouTube or Dailymotion about diabetes, and help us to know many things about this video. Who's talking? Is it a doctor? Is it a patient? Is it a journalist? Is it a guru? Is it someone we don't know? Is there any logo of an institution? What are the topics that are tackled in the video, and so on and so forth? That will first help them to better understand what are the reliable information on the internet, what are the signs of reliable information, and second, to have a full catalog of this video that they can use again with the same tool we developed. So with this, you can once they are classified, you can filter out depending on the topic you want or who's talking and so on and so forth, and go directly to the videos you're interested in. Patients also ask us to have a sharing part into the platform, because in the beginning they love to hear doctors, to have some medical information, but once they know more about the disease, they want to hear other patients and not doctors. And that's it. So gamers, e-learners, and patients are three communities where we find a lot of people really willing to help researchers to advance research. That's it. Thank you.
So we'll take just a couple of questions. No questions? Oh, there's one there.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was wondering on the ethical aspects of involving regular people in research. So, in the example you were showing us on MOOC on when they had to transcribe the texts. So I was wondering if students are informed that this is part of the research, or do they get any kind of compensation, or is it like a voluntary type of thing that they are doing? So I'm just interested in the ethical aspects mainly.
Good question. So it's fully voluntary, but it's completely transparent, and it has to be. It's even more sensitive for patients, because if you start with medical data, it's a highly sensitive issue. You have to be transparent all the time. But you saw in the first video that we are also transparent with gamers. So gamers receive some rewards into the game, but otherwise, no, they don't need. You have very active platform of citizen science, of amateur scientists. And when we ask patients, for instance, they are really willing to help and support. But also, I think, also into the MOOCs, you have, learning something is good. If you can really participate into the thing, it's even better. But it's fully transparent. Yeah.
I will have one question. Allow me.
You have a micro.
Yeah. I think that one aspect of citizen science that maybe has not been fully commented is its value to create enthusiasm among the general public about science. I put always the same example. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but I'm pretty sure that when the Apollo project, the Apollo mission was successful and so on, you could go and ask any taxi driver in the US what US was doing at that moment, and probably the answer was, we are sending a guy to the moon. So in view of your let's say pilot groups, etc., how would you organize a citizen science project around a mission that will make everybody enthusiastic?
Everybody it's always difficult. As I said, there exists a platform where everybody can go. We more went into tackling existing communities because you have a large amount of people already there and very often active but so there also exist some astronomic societies who love to do these kind of things. There are bird watchers, bird spotters that love to do citizen science. There are you can find existing also science amateurs associations, but for the full public, it's you see gamers. You can imagine that gamers are Mr. and Miss everyone. Actually, in EVE Online, there are elder gamers, but yeah.
Thank you, Pablo. So let's thank the speaker again. And now we will move to our last talk in this session from Martin Etzrodt. So Martin has a background in chemistry and biomedical research. He trained in Munich at Heidelberg University, at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, and also at the Harvard Medical School in Boston. And he was then a postdoc at the ETH in Zurich. And after which he moved to the Akasha Foundation, where he's a principal researcher. And the Akasha Foundation is led by the Ethereum co-founder Mihai Alizier, and it aims at building advanced global knowledge architecture based on Ethereum and the interplanetary file system. So, Martin.
Thank you. Okay, so that's interesting. I don't see it here, so yeah, that's fine. Switching gear a bit, so I basically want to say I have a biomedical background, so what I'm explaining you, maybe if I criticize current research systems a bit, comes always from that perspective, but it may apply also to other fields, of course. And I basically had this vision 2 years ago to really fundamentally change the way that we are working. There's a lot of bottlenecks and a lack of communication, and it's very slow and very difficult to really collaborate with people. At least in my field, I felt many times I can't really approach another researcher because I may like get scooped or these kind of things, you know. So my vision since 2 years that made me stop currently doing research actively as a scientist in a lab is this idea of building distributed organizations and enable a more collaborative way of doing research. And I say, well, what I want to do is basically build a new home for science, but this will take a bit of time. So in the meantime, I turned into a kitchen scientist, social scientist for a history of science. And I want to share with you the beginning, so basically a fundamental analysis of the current system and a little bit of the kernel of what I think these new technologies like blockchain and distributed web can bring there. And as I mentioned before, there is a problem since the beginning of modern science. We want to be the first to discover something, and there's these funny anecdotes that people like Galileo shared with Kepler, both then having telescopes and knowing maybe the other guy is going to make the discovery before me, but I want to be in the history book. They shared their results in anagrams and in signed and sealed letters. Same is true for Lavoisier, was described in Thomas Kuhn's book very nicely, how he basically sent a letter of the discovery of oxygen in the sealed letter to the French Academy of Sciences, just to be sure that he has still time to make his paper right before it then gets published. And then there's another thing, that's reproducibility. And if you look at the current way we work, this doesn't really go well together, because we need to publish the paper, and we want to be first, and after we don't really care and no one else cares. And doing my own research and papers that I have seen, you can have 80, 90 citations, not a single of those actually redo the work that has been done in the primary literature, despite knowing that the primary work is wrong. I mean, that's like you want to pull out your hair. So it was better. So in the Royal Academy of Science, for instance, people were doing experiments in front of witnesses, and I really like this idea. Hard to do maybe today, but this might be something. So how we work, there's 2 German quotes from a Jewish German-Hungarian MD that worked actually in Vienna here before the Second World War, and he said that so the scientific work is a work of the collective, and you require thinking collectives to actually even create a discovery, because people need to believe that what you find is really relevant. And maybe that's what I try to do with you here today, and then we can build a new home for science as well. 30 years later, in the beginning of the time where the British government said we need to understand better how we quantify research, and we need to have insights into where we put our money, there was Michael Polanyi who criticized this and said basically activities of scientists are coordinated and rely on constant communication, and the adjustment occurs in response of the results obtained by others. And now if we put these measures in place, these metrics, how we assess scientists and all of this, and bias even the way that scientists are working, we will basically end up in a terrible disaster, which I think, at least in biomedical research, we are in today. So how do we communicate? And that's the core, and I wrote a blog on this about a year ago as well. So scientific journals, and are there editors here or someone like this? Okay, great. So we hug each other later. You are a nice person, but I have to maybe criticize you a bit during this talk. So they do a good job, and actually I'll show you later. Since the 17th century, they collect and redistribute the scientific literature. So our work, they act also, and that's to me the most important thing that's till today, as a notary. So they say you are the first author of this study, and because you're the first author, the government says you get funding and so on. So this is this notary role, and they do filtering, and it's a terrible job if you're an editor. They are always super stressed and have to go through all these masses of papers, you know, it's a lot. But then they do 2 other things, and that's economics a bit. They artificially restrict the numbers of articles per issue. This is, you may say, sure, because the editor has a lot of work, but there's another reason, that's a physical one. If you have to ship the print to the libraries, also there's a limit of how many pages you want to have every month or week. And that doesn't exist anymore. We have the internet and the web now for 30 years, especially the web. And so what they essentially do is they turn what we call today an anti-rival good into a rival one. So a rivalrous good is one that when you consume it, no one else can do the same anymore with it. So if I eat my lunch, then you can't. And an anti-rival good is something new, a concept that occurred actually in the time of the web. Lawrence Lessig, a lawyer from Harvard, introduced this roughly together with also with Weber from California. And so the concept they basically claim here is that the free dissemination of data and knowledge increases its value and exceeds the profit that would be gained from it if you restrict the access through copyright, IP, or even a paywall in publishing. So the concept, again, of an anti-rival good is one that actually gains in value when you share it with many more people than just a few. And a good example is language. If you came up with your own language and you speak it just with yourself, it doesn't help much. But if many people speak the same language, then it's a very valuable thing for us. Same for code, and that's where this comes from and first emerged. So this is a pity. This is too dark, but so here is basically the logo of Elsevier. And the logo of Elsevier is this, you can look at it as this tree of knowledge, and there's the scholar that eats the fruits. And it also has a Latin inscription saying non solus. And that's interesting. It's there since 1620, and actually this is Elsevier is the guy that published the work of Galileo. So the publishing industry and modern science, they go together since a long time. And I basically did this triangle of money that is non solus, you are not alone, basically, is the scholar and the publisher, they depend on each other. If there's no publisher, if you don't have an outlet to communicate your research, then it's not much worth. And so, yeah, the publisher does a great job. Of course, he also depends on the scholar. But now comes the question, where does the funding come from? So we depend as scientists from the funding. And the funder said, oh, it's a great way if we can use the publishing system and some metrics to assess the quality of the researcher. So you have this vicious triangle, and you have scientific associations there inside as well. That is the triangle of money right now, and this is where we are a bit stuck. Now, what if there could be another way to disseminate our knowledge in a free way that is lowering the cost so much that we don't have to ship these big packages of paper around in the world? And there is something, it's called the web, invented at CERN, and it's in the proposal of Tim Berners-Lee described as a system for manipulating information and a pool of information to develop which could grow and evolve. And the method of storage shouldn't place a restraint on this information. And basically, for most of the data, I mean, we are never running out of disk space so much. It is true, and this is actually a draft of this initial proposal. It was initiated. There are different stories, but one is basically to manage the massive coordinated effort from a single person like Tim Berners-Lee sitting there down on the right corner. And if he works on a proposal and this has to go up the ranks to the administration heads, division heads of CERN, like everything should be captured and nothing should be lost on the way. So we want to have a data storage that collects all the information and is hyperlinked, basically. So we do not lose trace of even a tiniest technician's contribution to knowledge. But then something went wrong. So in 6 years after the web was created, all scientists around the world were using this. And the universities, I guess you remember, some of you were the first places where you could have high-speed internet access and web access. This was quite cool place to go. As a high school student, I loved this. And then they said, okay, we need to digitize all the back issues. How they did it is they basically, instead of saying we just have a public effort, the libraries are full with all these things, we just have to fund someone scanning this all in, we left it to digital libraries. They'd made a business model out of this, and they were asked subscription fees in order to access this. So JSTOR is making 80 million a year right now. If Lawrence Lessing asked it once, it's on the Wikipedia page on JSTOR, if you wanted to have this all financed through public, all the back issues of all the journals in JSTOR back to 1600 would have been $250 million to do. Now JSTOR also has a so-called moving wall. That means you have public access until certain, let's say the 90s or 2015 today, and then everything else that is paywalled will be still paywalled for most. But that's not, so that let this open access movement and the sharing economy and all of these things grow. And then there was a guy, Aaron Swartz, who committed suicide in 2013. I'll tell you why in a second. And he's behind the implementation of Creative Commons. He also programmed parts of the RSS feed. So that's, as a teenager, quite impressive. There's a movie called The Internet's Own Boy or something. It's interesting to watch. So, and he said in his manifesto, we need to take information where it is stored, make our copies and share them with the world. We need to download scientific journals and upload them to file sharing networks. We need to fight for the open guerrilla open access movement. So that's him a few years later at MIT, at the time when I was there writing my PhD actually, and was fighting for getting my papers published. He actually connected his laptop to a hub, and he downloaded with a simple script through a legal access from the MIT library, which I also had at the time, all 4 to 5 million back-issued archived journals there. And they found him, unfortunately, and in the aftermath of this persecution as a hacker led him then to commit suicide 2 years later. But that's an interesting story to follow up. And at the same time, someone else had the same idea, and what she found, it was Sci-Hub, that I hope every one of you has the plugin on their Google Chrome browser already. And they say their mission is to remove any barrier impeding the widest possible distribution of knowledge in human society. So the web basically could dramatically lower the cost at which we can access scientific information and make it also faster and accelerate, but it's not really there. For instance, here now the last deal agreement for Wiley in Germany is now pushing open access, but in an interesting way. So the journal said, okay, we do it, but you need to still pay us a fee. And so the fee for publish and read is now for a scientist and paid by the institution, so we don't know this, we don't feel it. It's like 2,750 euros. Then you have some extras on top, this gold open access. So that is about a third of the papers published through Wiley in Germany. That's roughly 27 million euros estimated per year. If you add Elsevier, which is doing this now, and the other Springer Nature, then we will get to something like, I'd estimate, 100 million euros a year that Germany spends on scientific, whatever it's called, like this paper stuff, access. Now, another example, though, which I find quite compelling, is that preprint servers are a much, much cheaper alternative to sharing information. And in other fields, I know, than biomedical research, they are already well implemented, but not, unfortunately, in biomedical. And still, even if they are, if you go to your funder and ask what counts, my preprint or my journal-accepted work, they will always say this is what counts. And here, if you go into the numbers, it's to basically have all the math, physics, and astronomy published data available costs for the entire world, operation costs per year of €1 million or $1 million. So there's a hint to the publisher that is firms need only to exist when markets transactions are costlier than the firm's internal coordination cost. Now, the internet or the web basically has made these internal coordination costs negligibly low for sharing information, and we see that this is already happening, and by the way, in a much more convenient way if you go here than through your own library. So we have already basically an existing infrastructure for sharing information for very low cost, and that is the academic libraries. And without fancy blockchain or anything, reading a lot now into this Plan S and so on, I have another, I would propose this, my radical Plan S, would call it the European Open Data Stream. So imagine we could have preprint servers and all the funders just demand, and this is kind of partially in the Plan S implementation or proposal already, but I just want to outline this. Imagine we would make it mandatory that all the work has to be on preprint servers first. And ideally in a way that is not, okay, we put it on the preprint server when the Nature editor said, I'll publish it, and we know because of the funders, we agree, but like really before this 2-year process that you get until you publish your work. Now, this could mean that if we had the manuscript whenever we feel it is relevant, and also maybe ideally always with the linked data so we can recapitulate this. eLife, for instance, is working on this, like R scripts embedded in hypertext-based papers and so on. Then we would have an amazing data stream that we could all access. I want to maybe mention that the big publishers have already understood this, and they still need our money now, because what they want to do is they give a shit about publication fees. This is just because the government still thinks they need to pay this 100 million a year. But papers is not where they're going to make money with. They will make money with this information that basically is who has worked on what, where, and when, and how can we connect these dots. And this is something I think we should take basically into our hands, the scientists' hands, and for a very fraction of the cost, implement this and make this viable. Now, this requires new technologies, though. So this where I do a little excursus in this blockchain world, and that is basically we need to build this distributed web. And one of the things, or two things that are missing in the current web is this double spending problem, which was solved by Bitcoin. I think in terms of knowledge creation, it is you can copy anything and don't have to attribute it. So in order to get self-serving publishing and knowledge as transactions, we need to implement this, and then distributed research organizations is a bit too much maybe. So, but the distributed web is something that requires two things. It requires an immutable store and censorship resistant store of data. That was basically done by Juan Benet and IPFS. And as a blockchain, which is a notarization layer, Vitalik Buterin created Ethereum, and there are others. But I mean, currently it looks like most developers are actually going to be in this. And I just want to, like, there's this question, who owns the blockchain and what kind of scammy people they are. So if you look at when this started, this is 2014, it was a very small crowd of people, gamers, something from 18, 19 to 30, very young people, and they were not actually scammy, to me, at least. They're a quite nice crowd. And how would it look? So instead of today, where we have a centralized server that is controlled, like we have Facebook, Amazon, all of this, and we are all accessing this, and we are relying on the server to actually tell us the truth and give us an identity and all of this. In the next way of the web, we would basically have peer-to-peer networks, and we have instead of addressing the data or by going to the server and sending a request to it, we would look for the content. And in case of IPFS, it's that you basically have a hash of the data that also is the address that points to the data. And you ask who has this data on their hard drive and so on. The other thing is you can now have an identity. In this case, that's where the blockchain comes in. You are the owner of a private key, and that private key basically is a proto-identity, and you can prove by being the owner that you have, for instance, created a piece of work. And now these identities can be given to institutions, individuals, and machines interoperably. Now, I did this experiment with a friend of mine, Sebastian, from ETH. Where I had some of my microscopy data, and we submitted these data, and then also like analysis and interpretation done in some image analysis tool to this IPFS. What you get back is a hash. You could basically with your phone scan these codes and then go to the actual, you resolve the URL of this piece of data. And then what we did with this IPFS is that we had a little smart contract, this little script that would now make a transaction, send it to the Ethereum blockchain. And now that what I get from there now is a timestamp, because IPFS is time agnostic, so it doesn't matter when it happened. So that's why we need a notarization. And now what we got is basically this piece of data signed and time-stamped with my private key as a notarized file on this ledger. Yeah, and if you scan one of those, you get this kind of transactions and this publicly accessible. So to me, this is what I would call self-sovereign publishing, and it's a very simplistic thing, but it's the kernel and the underlying feature that I think is the most valuable of the whole blockchain field for science and the way that we will work in the future here. Now, what I found then is that there was another project that started with basically attacking the traditional social media networks that are basically also carrying a lot of the information that we have and capturing it. And they basically had already the same thing in place. And so I approached Mihai. I published a few of my lab book entries on his beta version of the platform. And 10 minutes later or so, he replied, and then we had a call, and that's how I ended up working now with Akasha. And just to summarize what we can do now with platforms like Akasha that already look nice and are doing some experiments in crypto economics as well on this, is we have a permanent publication of our results. We can attribute them through this proving that we are the owner of the public key that sent these data, and they are time-stamped as well. And now that these data become interoperable, because you have this address where your data are linked to, you can also now receive funds. You can trigger other contracts that release money in order to build a prototype, all these kind of things. So while blockchain 1.0 was the own bank, blockchain 2.0 is like be your own journal. And so we move into this self-sovereign way of working. Just briefly look into the future, what other things could be used. You could basically start to give a value to these data sets. One of the first things is a game called CryptoKitties. Who knows this? So, okay, a few people. So that kitty is the first one, and it's having a genetic algorithm behind. So you can mate this kitty with another one, and then it creates another type of kitty that will have some of the features of the parents inherited. And then, because if you mate the right ones with, then they become very beautiful, and people like to buy them. And so these kitties have been traded more than $1 million worth. The reason for that is that you can trade not the image itself, but you trade this token, this ERC 721 token, which is non-fungible. So it's kind of like a theater ticket, if you want. And so we could imagine that patents or IP becomes tradable and would be represented through ERC 721, and removing the entire layer of patent lawyers, patent offices, all of these big buildings and people working for. Then another thing is, in order to curate data, I mean, this is not necessarily to be organized in a market, because, you know, Encyclopedia Britannica was last published in 2010, and there are many studies that prove that Wikipedia really has emerged as a much better, faster, more on time curated source of knowledge than this print version. Why don't we, 30 years after the web was created, not get rid of the publishing industry? I don't understand. And one of the ways could be to have token curated registries, so that are basically rated lists. So if you tap into the European open data stream, you get every morning at breakfast 30 papers that you like, because you filtered accordingly, and you can read through, and then you decide which papers you take, which you read and which not. And basically these processes are locked, and they are locked for everyone that's doing this in a privacy-preserving way. But some people may spend quite a lot of time in these curations. Some people will report that they have actually reproduced the data, and you could then decide to tap into someone's curated stream of papers or publications that are maybe 4 or 5 months old, dating back to this time of publication, and have already reproduced these data. So we can create very interesting dynamic ways of curation, with the added benefit here of a TCR that there is something at stake for the people creating these lists. So if they are losing reputation, then the whole system breaks down and they are losing actually value. And this is this last thing, then I'm done, is basically the idea of coordination, removing it's called org tech, building distributed autonomous research organizations that may be going beyond local governmental, European levels of funding, and are actually democratizing the way that people can contribute to projects, allocate funds to them, maybe a little bit only, but creating enough value in the system that it can lead to a trusted way of execution for these research efforts as well. And I believe this is ways that we could get by many of the massive problems that we have. I mean, one of the crazy ideas would be to have such a distributed autonomous organization that asks the Brazilian government how much worth is the rainforest, and you buy it with tokens. Or you have a nice research project that you want to fund. And of course, governmental funders can also play a role here. And again, they could secure the IP and the value, because they are knowing that they can buy and tap into something like non-fungible tokens for this. Yeah, with this, this is it. And so I finish with 2 quotes. One is, the pursuit of science by independent self-coordinated initiatives assures the most efficient possible organization of scientific progress. That was in the 60s in defense of creating metrics. and we are now a bit later, and I think we should really go into tackling this and getting back to this point. My quote, modified from a tweet I seen recently, was, "So we became scientists to change the world and not to produce papers." Maybe you think about this when you go in your next lab meeting and tell your students, "Oh, this could be a paper," you know. Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks.
So we can just take a few questions because we're already running late. Anyone? Yes?
Thank you very much for your talk. I like the idea, but what about peer review? Where is this translation, transaction, no, with the peer review?
So yeah, I skipped that part. I have a whole thinking about peer review, and I mean, I think it's, so that's the filtering part, that I think these curation mechanisms that could be alternatively built, if we have such an open data stream, could improve a lot, yeah. Because initially, when I read a paper, and if I do a peer review, which I did a lot, I mean, it's not, you don't have the time. You can only assess this is complete bogus, and that, of course, the editor did already, and then you can understand. Conceptually, that's okay, but you have only 3 people looking at this, and after that you put this amazingly important stamp on the data, and too early. So I would propose that we try to create a collective intelligence for peer review that is like have much more people and open peer reviews, or not even open, but also, yeah, like have more people look at it and have these metrics create themselves. And what we do is we reduce this to the impact factor a lot now, the quality of the paper, and that's just it's very poor. And this is we can do much better if we have this open way. I mean, Wikipedia is a proof that yeah.
Yes.
How do you address the issue of reproducibility of data? Of the reproducibility in your talk, you mentioned initially.
Yes.
Yeah, so how are we going around with this?
So there's one thing, of course, is at the institutional level. We need to demand, which is not the case currently, that the data are not only, it's only the report published, and the journalists do a very poor job in asking you for the primary data. For some things, yes, but not for all. But everything, your entire drive, ideally, would be stored. And it is possible. We have the capacity to store this. It's not that we have to reduce it to that. So then everyone can recapitulate the data and maybe find errors, and then it's not so much we fear that someone said this is wrong, but we actually learn from it because there was an error in one of your calculations, or some other people will make it much better. Currently, we cannot address this, and reproducibility in biomedical research is estimates as 40% and less, right? And I know it. I mean that's as well, right? I mean, we see it or sense it. There's something not right. Yeah.
No more questions. So we are already 10 minutes late, so I think we will finish here. So thank you all for coming, and I hope that this session provided some food for thought for the future. Thanks.